Welcome back. Continuing with the Olympian gods, we come to Demeter, who's tied up in themes of fertility that predate the Olympian pantheon. After dealing with agricultural deities, we'll continue to Poseidon and Athena. There are loads of etiological myths explaining why and how the earth is fertile, and what magic occurs when you plant seeds and get whole crops in return. Imagine you're a member of a subsistence culture. Why are there bountiful harvests? Why are there bad harvests? What magic or superstition can we invent to gain control over these things? Compare with science today, which explains things to us. The Greeks used myth to understand the way the world works. They probably didn't think of it as magic, but as the science of understanding all the relationships in the universe. Almost without exception, the fertility of the natural world is figured as the fertility of the female. Remember from Hesiod, Gaia is a woman, the earth is a woman, Demeter is a woman. We will have males associated with agriculture, but they only have minor roles. So let's talk about deities associated with fertility. Gaia is one of the primordial divinities in Hesiod's Theogony. The Greeks considered worship of Gaia the most primitive of religions. So Gaia, the earth, has very few actual cult places or representations. This is a rare figurine depicting Gaia. But we do have a metron in Olympia, a metron meaning a temple of the Great Mother. Gaia is early on associated with oracular power. So the most famous Greek oracle was Delphi, associated with Apollo. But Apollo had to, in order to obtain this oracular site, he had to defeat an earth-born serpent, Python, who guarded it. Pausanias tells us, they say that in the earliest times, the oracular seat belonged to Gaia before Apollo. So in a way, we can see these old feminine abstractions and deities being replaced by the Olympians bit by bit, replaced by the justicey sky god instead of the bountiful earth goddess. Hecate is not often tied in with agriculture, but in the Theogony, she is associated with prosperity. Usually we connect her with the underworld and with dark forms of magic, as we will see in the story of the Argonauts. She's sometimes assimilated to moon worship as well, so perhaps she is important to the harvest for calendar reasons. Note that in the Homeric hymn, she becomes the personal attendant of Persephone, both Persephone as fertility goddess and as queen of the underworld. There is some suggestion that the various earthy deities, Gaia, Hecate, Hera, Demeter, and Persephone, are all aspects of a single mother goddess. There are mother goddesses and great goddesses in the Near East, whether conflated with other Near Eastern goddesses or not. Fertility and female divinities have a long history, but the dangers in supposing we can understand a tradition of matriarchy and mother goddesses prior to the Indo-European invasion is troubled by our inability to contextualize the evidence. Sure, there's lots of female imagery from the Neolithic period. We'll look at those in a moment. Some scholars see this as evidence of a primordial matriarchy ruled by women in early Europe. Some simply see evidence of a primordial creator goddess. But the evidence for matriarchy and for that sort of proto-mother goddess is pretty slim. The idea is as much an overextension of 1970s feminism as it is an identifiable religious mythic figure. So what do we see in the Paleolithic era? A bunch of, well, here's one example. The Venus of Willendorf is a 4.5-inch statuette of a female figure, estimated to have been made between 25,000 and 28,000 years ago, associated with the so-called Gravettian culture of Central European in the Paleolithic period. That's the Old Stone Age. Interestingly, the limestone it's made of is not local to the Willendorf area in Austria. It's from more than 100 miles away. So was this carved on site, or is this something that was stone was carried here? I don't know. We have over 200 other figurines from roughly the same time and place. And you know, Venus is a stupid name for these. If they are a goddess, it's probably not a love goddess like Venus. It's more likely generative like Gaia or agricultural like Demeter. What they have in common is exaggerated primary and secondary sexual characteristics: breasts, belly, butt, vulva, perhaps symbols of fertility, relatively small head, and very little detail on the rest of the body. Well, apparent similarity, but systematic study reveals many differences, so it's not clear that there is even a Venus type of figurine. On the right is the Venus of Willendorf again, and on the left, the Venus of Dolny Sietonitze, one of the oldest ceramic objects in the world, 31,000 to 27,000 years ago. Here's one called the Venus of Kostenki. Notice that the Venus of Willendorf has her head covered with representation of plaited or woven cloth. Other figurines display evidence of etching meant to symbolize clothing, but we're not really sure if these are even nude figurines. Maybe they were meant to be dressed in cloth. Are they even supposed to be goddesses? Or are they just dolls? Or maybe symbols of women's roles as mother, nourisher, etc.? Maybe used to bless marriages or pregnancies. So I'm not even sure why we're talking about them. Let's get back to Earth Mother goddesses and agricultural deities. Before we look at Homeric hymn number 2, I want to point out that there's another Homeric hymn to Demeter, number 13. There's not much to it. It looks like it might be the beginning of a longer hymn, but our ancient sources at one point suggest that it stood alone. Demeter with lovely hair, sacred goddess, I begin to sing of her and her daughter, the surpassingly beautiful Persephone. Farewell, goddess, save our city and guide my song. Demeter's name is somewhat unclear. Meter means mother, but the de root could come from, it could be Gaia or Zeus, or Da or Za, Indo-European root for grain. So I think I'd prefer grain mother. This hymn mentions her daughter, Persephone, also called Proserpina by Western Greeks and the Italian people like the Romans. But she's often called Kore, a name that is simply the Greek word for young girl or daughter. I hope you got to know the major elements of the story found in the larger hymn to Demeter. It functions as the goddess's most important episode and as an etiological myth about the founding of her most important cult worship. So Persephone is abducted, Demeter looks all over for her, withdraws from the company of the gods, and then the people of Eleusis bring her out of it to some degree. It begins, well, like a Homeric hymn. The singer introduces the goddess and mentions the story that will be told. It ends with the traditional recapitulation of the goddess's major spheres of influence and request for her blessing. I shall begin my song to the fair-haired holy Demeter and her daughter with lovely ankles, her whom Hades abducted, whom thundering all-seeing Zeus had given his brother to marry. What else does it have with the other Homeric hymns that we've looked at? The motif of a god in disguise. Something about just the difference between gods and mortals, the beauty and terror of the gods. And I guess we'll develop the theme of the 3 ages of women. Maiden, like Persephone, mother or wife, like Demeter, and old woman, like Demeter in disguise. We'll talk about this in a moment. I will suggest 4 different ways to read this hymn. Number 1, Demeter's child is taken from her and hidden in the underworld, just as Gaia's children were taken from her and hidden away down inside the earth. You remember in Hesiod's Theogony. For some scholars, this is evidence of the connection of Demeter and Persephone with the primordial great goddess, or the earth, Gaia, and her children. The second reading I suggest is an allegory. What is an allegory? A story which uses symbols to convey a hidden or ulterior meaning. In an allegory, there's going to be a surface narrative that only hints at the underlying layer of meaning. So, the most popular ancient reading was that Persephone's descent to Hades should be correlated with winter, her return with spring, and the harvest in the fall. Indeed, we can expand and see the intercession of Zeus as symbolic of rain and how he helps the plants grow. In this, Persephone herself is the seed, planted underground and then returning in the spring. That division into 3 reflects the tripartite division of the world between Zeus, Hades, and Poseidon, mentioned in the beginning of the poem. 3 seasons is standard in Homer: spring, summer, and winter. Persephone is associated with spring flowers, but the mystery and Demeter's rituals are associated with harvest time. which the Greeks thought of as the last part of summer, only sometimes given its own title as Phthenoporon, the withering season, which we call autumn or fall. So does that make sense? The story is an allegory for agriculture. Plants rise up in the spring and summer, are harvested and gone in the winter, and the seeds go back underground so that plants can come again in the next spring. Newer approaches have looked at the cycle of life that is represented in the figures of Persephone, Demeter, and Demeter in disguise, the maiden, the mother, and the old woman. Certainly the myth dramatizes the different stages of female life. Feminist scholars have been interested in the particularly feminine point of view in this poem, which offers a different perspective than the misogyny of Hesiod's narrative. Here we see the consequences of male-centered marriage for the mother and the apparent lack of maternal input into the marriage of a daughter. Persephone is married off to her uncle, a commonplace in antiquity, and to a much older man, another commonplace, unfortunately. Athenian ideals tended to favor mid-teenage girls being married to men around age 30. We perhaps see a representation of a first sexual experience in the episode in Hades. Persephone is depicted in Hades' bed when Hermes arrives, and she's specifically described as unwilling. The pomegranate seed that Hades secrets to her has been read by many as a symbol of insemination. She's tied to the underworld the way a girl is bound to her husband once they have a baby. In stressing this correlation, the myth problematizes Greek marriage as a conflict between genders. Demeter, Hecate, and Persephone on one side, Zeus, Helios, and Hades on the other. Persephone's is an extreme form of male-dictated marriage, removal to the household of the husband with no input from her own mother. That said, we might read some agency into Persephone, especially when we consider her reaction to Hades' offer of powers. At this moment, for the first time, she's called thoughtful. And the narrator leaves it unclear whether she rejoices at this moment because of happiness because she gets to see her mother, or because of the promise of power in the underworld as its queen, or maybe both. Tellingly, when she tells of her time in Hades to her mother, she doesn't mention the offered powers. We could go further and wonder at her addition of the forcefulness of the pomegranate seed, since this doesn't really occur in the initial narrative in the underworld. This could be explained as the desire of the goddess for her own individuality and powers, and in the reading of Persephone as paradigmatic bride, the desire to mature and become a woman, to find her own place. So the hymn can't be read simply as a condemnation of patriarchal marriage customs, because the attitude of Persephone is a bit more complex than simple disdain. Moving on, Demeter had two rather important festivals that I'll describe. The Thesmophoria, that's a civic festival, 3 days long, held in late October, commemorated the third of the year when Demeter abstained from her role of goddess of the harvest and growth, spending the harsh summer months of Greece when vegetation dies and there's no rain, in mourning for her daughter who was in the underworld. The distinctive feature of the festival is the sacrifice of piglets. The ceremony involved sinking sacrifices into the earth by night and retrieving the decaying remains of pigs that had been placed the previous year in Demeter's sacred trenches and pits. After prayers, the nasty remains of the pigs from the previous year were mixed with seeds and planted. This is what Walter Burkert calls the clearest example in Greek religion of agrarian magic. Back to mystery religions. What is a mystery religion? The Greek words muein, to initiate, or emistes is an initiate, the person initiated, and mysteria, things to do with initiates. So a mystery religion is a practice into which you must be led, you must be initiated. Solidarity is created through the difficulty and secrecy of access. Compare modern secret societies. Mysteries should not be considered a separate religion distinct from the polis religion, but a complementary sacred experience which offers more intimate dealings with deities. On completing the final stage of initiation, the mystes is called an epoptes, one who sees, or maybe one who has seen. So the hymn to Demeter can be read as a foundation story for the Eleusinian cult's huge mysteria. I cannot overstate the importance of this cult. We could call these cults initiation religions, to be more specific. I don't want to overstate the mystery aspect, since many people were in on the secrets, and most of the population of Athens became initiated. I don't want to overstate the mystical aspect, since this is not fully introspective and personal, but still part of the public religion. The most famous of these mystery cults nowadays would have to be Christianity. Early Christians referred to the Eucharist as the mysteria of their religion, one of the sacraments whereby you become an initiated Christian. So initiation can take some bizarre forms. Where is Eleusis? You see within that red circle right outside of Athens. I won't bore you with the archaeological details of the site, except to say that there are several buildings which could accommodate many new initiates each time. And the main hall, the Telesterion, was constructed quite early, considering that most of the large building programs in this region take place in the 5th century after 480 BCE. So this was a small town near Athens, essentially a suburb, but now it's almost downtown Athens, since the modern city is quite a bit larger. How does the hymn to Demeter interact with the Eleusinian mysteries? Much of the ritual of the eventual mysteries, at least what we know about, can be read in this hymn. So the hymn symbolizes the experience of people getting initiated into this cult. In other stories, Triptolemus is supposed to have received the secrets of agriculture from Demeter, and Eumolpus is the first hierophant, the first sacred priest of the mysteries. So the narrative in the Homeric hymn can act as a complement or an alternative to the story of, I guess, Prometheus as the culture hero of mankind. Triptolemus is the bringer of agriculture, which is just as important as fire. So the initiation rite is a 9-day event. And you remember in the poem, Demeter roams over the earth for 9 days. Participation is open to everybody. I mean, restricted to adult initiates, but from our evidence, most of the Athenian population was admitted. Slaves, foreigners, women were allowed, but no murderers, no one with blood guilt. Much of our knowledge comes from the Roman period, when Christian converts made much of exposing the secrets of the rites, how they fasted, the costumes they wore, ritual purification they went through, and the sacrifice of pigs. A long procession takes place from central Athens out to Eleusis along the road known after that as the Sacred Way. I guess compares to Demeter's search for her missing daughter. In some way, bawdy humor and obscene jokes were associated with the mysteries, possibly evoked in the hymn by the scene between the slave Iambe and Demeter, when the human makes the goddess laugh. Perhaps not coincidental that the genre of Greek poetry associated with obscene comedy is called iambic, for Iambe, that slave. In the sacred precinct during the rites, other rituals were performed. We don't know much about them. What was the dramatic moment of revelation? In the Christian era, we hear that the secret password was, I fasted, I drank the kukeon, I took from the chest, I worked and deposited it in the basket, and from the basket into the chest. Whatever all that means. Our source there, Clement of Alexandria, has hints that these objects were of some sort of obscene nature. Aristotle tells us that the initiate did not learn something, but experience something, which changed his or her state of mind. In the sacred precinct during the rites, participants drank a sacred drink, perhaps barley and water, the way Demeter does in the hymn. They call this the kukeon. You recall the mutilation of the Herms? The special committee that investigated that sacrilege discovered in the course of their inquiries that some of the suspects had performed the rites of the cult of Eleusis in private homes and before non-initiates, both of which were sacrilegious. Why would people gather together in their homes to drink the sacred drink of this cult? Some other questions linger. What does it mean that the initiates describe seeing things like flashing lights and strange colors? There's an optional reading on Blackboard. Carl Ruck of Boston University argues that the kukeon beverage includes a hallucinogenic fungus. It's a very compelling argument, especially in light of the way this experience is considered life-changing by any who report going through it, but it has not been universally accepted. It would explain why people drank it recreationally, and it would explain the profound visual aspect of the ritual, but there's simply no proof. So why mysteria? Why mystery cults? Recall that regular Greek state religion offered no insight into the afterlife. The afterlife is just a boring place you wait out eternity. It was focused on the actions of people and cities. Mystery religions, at least broadly, focused more on the lived experience of individuals. They offered a secure vision of some sort of afterlife, whether reincarnation or divine rewards. In the Homeric hymn, I guess Demophoon could be the first initiate of sorts. And recall that the Persephone story speaks to death and rebirth as part of a cycle of life. So this would remove the terror of death for those involved. The metaphorical parallels between agriculture and death and rebirth are shared by many religions. We see it in John chapter 12. Very truly, I tell you, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. Moving on. I like to lump together Athena and Poseidon, since they are very different, but share one story of a competition between the two. This reconstruction of the west pediment of the Parthenon depicts the story, which we'll come to shortly. What do you see in this map of the original Greek lands? Remember that Greece is not the Greek mainland peninsula, but the Aegean Sea. Not the land masses, but all the waters that touch them. So imagine the importance of sea gods. The Greeks were fishermen and sea traders. This ship is a trireme, 3 banks of oars, a crew of about 200 or so. Actually, this is a naval fighting vessel, not a trading vessel, so I don't know why I'm showing it to you. These were used to basically just ram into each other to sink enemy ships. You can't see the large bronze ram on the front of the boat in this photo. Yes, photo, by the way. This is not an artist rendition. This is a reconstructed boat, the Olympias, a registered boat in the modern Greek Navy. I got to ride on it once. So the sea is filthy with old gods, and it's not always exactly clear who parented what offspring, but we don't really need to worry about that. It goes all the way back to Gaia creating the sea, Pontus, and they have a child, Nereus, who fathers an unimportant figure, except that he has more than 50 daughters, sea nymphs we call nereids, and some of them are important figures. There are some old sea monster sort of people like Phorcus and Cato. Cato gives us the word for whale, Thaumas, Eurybiae. And these tend to engender other monsters. The goddess Iris comes out of there somewhere, but the harpies, the Graiai, Gorgons, maybe including Medusa. And then there's Oceanus, the ocean for the Greeks, for the ancient Greeks, is a river that flows around the outside of the circle of lands, together with some shadowy Tethys figure, have the Oceanid children. Hesiod must have named 50 of those bastard Oceanids. One of them is Amphitrite, the wife of Poseidon. Another is Metis. Remember, Zeus swallows her and then gives birth to Athena out of his head. Another figure might show up again, Proteus, referred to as the old man of the sea. He could change his shape and knew important things. So if you found him and forced him to tell you answers, he could prophesy. Not much going on in the Homeric hymn to Poseidon. Concerning Poseidon, a great god, I begin to sing, the shaker of the land and the unharvested sea, god of the deep who holds Helicon and wide Aigai. The gods have given you a double portion of honor, O shaker of the earth, to be tamer of horses and savior of ships. Hail Poseidon, girdler of the earth, you dark-haired god, and with kindly heart, O blessed one, help those who sail. Poseidon's temperament is mentioned in a few ancient sources. Sometimes he's calm and level, and sometimes he's turbulent. Get it? Like the sea. The title Earthshaker is a pretty important one. You'll see him called that a lot. So Poseidon is the god of the sea, but he is also the god of earthquakes. He's responsible for shaking the earth. And he created horses. Created them, or in one gross version, he is the biological father of all horses because he knocked up Demeter in the form of a new 4-legged thingy. We'll look at the story of his competition with Athena shortly. Poseidon had tons of children with both goddesses and mortals, so we're just going to look at a few important individuals. We don't know anything about Thoosa, the mother of the Cyclops Polyphemus, whom Odysseus will blind during his epic travels. For that matter, we don't know much about Cyclopes. The name means wheel eyes, and long before the story of the one-eyed giant came about, it may have referred to foreigners with round eyes. Perhaps this was a Near Eastern warning about the dangerous round-eyed people of Europe. But let's talk about that some more when we read the Odyssey. The important point here is that Odysseus should not have angered a son of Poseidon before setting out on a sea journey. He ends up losing all of his ships and all of his men before he gets home. I'm sorry about the spoilers. Medusa was a beautiful priestess of Athena. Poseidon gets it on with her in Athena's temple, so Athena disfigures her so horribly that anyone who looks at her turns into stone. Well, I don't know. I think this statue is kind of pretty. She certainly looks sad. Like, Poseidon raped me and all I got was this lousy hairdo. Actually, stories conflict about whether it was seduction or force. This is an unfortunately common ambiguity in Greek myth. We'll come back to this point several times this term. The Greeks consider it rape if the man does not have the permission of the girl's father. They don't care whether he seduces her and she's willing or forces her, because the big violation in their mind is that something of value was stolen from the family. What the girl wanted is not an issue. Let that sink in for a moment. Medusa has two immortal sisters called Gorgons. This is the weird part for me. This girl is turned into a monster, but there are already two other monsters of the same type, and they are her sisters? Maybe they adopted her after she was changed into one of them. They're usually depicted with wings and with snakes for hair. The goddess Athena helps the hero Perseus kill Medusa when he needs her head for something unrelated. We'll look at this myth again a bit later in the course. Just remember in the meantime that Medusa can't get a break. Athena puts Medusa's head on Zeus's shield when Perseus is done with it. His shield called the Aegis, a word related to goats, since the shield was made of goat skin. Apparently the Gorgon's head strikes fear into anyone who sees it. Athena becomes the king Zeus's shield bearer, so she's often depicted with a goat skin thingy with a Gorgon's head on it. So the important features of this story depicted here. Perseus about to kill a Gorgon. Gorgons must be older than the snake-head lady version. The top left image shows a non-snake-headed Gorgon. This somewhat cat-like face will show up in a lot of apotropaic locations, like the stone on the top right. The term apotropaic means warding off or turning away. Common modern examples include saying, bless you, after a sneeze, to ward off evil spirits, or knocking on wood after saying something risky. This stone would have been a warning to trespassers. So, turns out Poseidon was a baby daddy, but all that time his kids couldn't get out of Medusa's freaky cursed body. When Perseus cuts off her head, out flies their child Pegasus from her neck hole. I love this lower image since it reads like a comic strip. Medusa and Poseidon about to embrace, or she's coming to him for help and he's saying, talk to the hand, you're not pretty anymore. Then on the right, Medusa without a head, with a tiny horse flying off out of her neck hole. Pegasus, the flying horse, plays an important role in the myth of Bellerophon, which I guess we can take a moment on right now. Bellerophon is compelled to fight a nasty monster called the Chimera, which has a lion head and a goat head, a snake for its tail, and it breathes fire. So he enlists the aid of a flying horse so that he can shoot arrows at it from a safe height above. I don't understand why this image has him confronting it head on. I mean, if you have a flying horse. This one is even worse. He's not even riding Pegasus. He's just letting him distract the beast while he, punches it? Oh, and uses a spear. Anyway, he defeats the monster, and then the tale ends with a cocky Bellerophon deciding that he should fly up to Mount Olympus to join the gods. But Pegasus realizes that this would be sacrilege, so he bucks him off halfway up. Poor Bellerophon. The Cretan bull who becomes the constellation Taurus is not a child of Poseidon, just a gift that he gives. You may remember reading a fragment of Euripides' lost play, The Cretans. Minos was king in Crete. In order to confirm his right to rule, rather than any of his brothers, he prayed that Poseidon send him a snow-white bull as a sign. Poseidon sends him the bull with the understanding that it was to be sacrificed to the god afterward. Deciding that Poseidon's bull was too fine a specimen to kill, Minos sent it to the herds and substituted another inferior bull for the sacrifice. This enrages the god, so Poseidon has Aphrodite cause Pasiphae, the wife of Minos, to fall in love with the bull, and she subsequently gives birth to the half-man, half-bull Minotaur. The inventor Daedalus helps the queen work out the logistics of consummating with the bull. This is kind of an awful image, isn't it? I'll just leave it there for a second. Oh, this one's not much better. This is a sculpture in Vilanova i la Geltrú, a coastal fishing town near Barcelona in Spain. So the big story is about how Poseidon and Athena vied for the patronage of the city of Athens. Athena won by promising them an olive tree, while Poseidon offered only a saltwater spring. The contest was memorialized on the west pediment of the Parthenon, located on the Acropolis of Athens. The west side was the back of the temple for the Greeks because their temples all face east, face the sunrise. But because of the reuse of these buildings by Christians, the Parthenon was eventually a church, then a mosque. We have little of this sculpture group because early Christians reoriented the entrance to face west and busted up this sculpture group. Oh, worse yet, in September of 1687, in a war between the Ottoman Empire and Venice, an Ottoman ammunition dump inside the building was ignited by Venetian bombardment. I don't really know who the bigger asshole is, the people who stored their gunpowder in one of the most beautiful ancient temples, or the people who shot at it just in case it had munitions in it. The archaeologists are finally doing some repair and reconstruction work on the Parthenon. In this image, you can't really see all the big holes in the remains. So this is actually what we have to reconstruct the pediment from, these little scraps. Again, Poseidon and Athena are competing to be the god of this new city of Athens. Athena wins with an olive tree because Poseidon only offered a saltwater spring. And what good is that? Although in one version of the story, Poseidon gave them a horse. Either way, it's nowhere near as good as the olive tree. Wait, what's so great about olive trees? To answer that question, you need to understand what Greece is like. The mainland and the islands are kind of crappy. They're dry in the growing season and rainy in the winter. They have rocky soil, more like slightly soily rocks. Mostly just scrub plants and thorn bushes, things only a goat can eat. The olive tree is remarkable. It spends 20 years sending down a taproot system before producing olives. After that, basically nothing can kill it. I saw an entire olive grove after a fire. Once, every tree was blackened, and on the tip of every branch was a tiny little knob, which turned out to be the olive pits. Each olive had gone up like a torch, and only the pits remained stuck to the tree. I saw the guy whose grove it was and offered my condolences. He just laughed and explained that the trees were fine. They would produce olives again within the year. But what's so great about olives? Yes, you can eat them, but that was a fraction of their use in the ancient world. Most of them were pressed for oil. Yes, you can cook with and eat olive oil, but that was a fraction of its use in the ancient world. The Greeks used olive oil for food, for bathing, for personal hygiene, for perfumes, for sacrifices, and remember how those olives burned? For light. The best lighting technology at the time was olive oil burning oil lamps. So the Greeks exported their oil all over the Mediterranean in ceramic jars. These were their two main industries, ceramics and olive oil, and they were the best in the world at making and shipping both of them. So you can understand why Athena was so important to the Athenians and to the rest of the Greeks. She was also the goddess of wisdom and crafts. Crafts like weaving and pottery, but also warcraft. She's not Ares, the god of mindless slaughter. She covers strategy and tactics, that part of war. She's also one of three main virgin goddesses, Artemis, Hestia, and Athena. Her main temple in Athens is called the Parthenon because Parthenos in ancient Greek means virgin. There's a Parthenon in Nashville, Tennessee, a full-scale replica of the original Parthenon in Athens. It was built in 1897 as part of the Tennessee Centennial Exposition. Today, that Parthenon, which functions as an art museum, stands as the centerpiece of Centennial Park, a large public park just west of downtown Nashville. There was, in 1990, a recreation of the Athena Parthenos statue in the center of the Parthenon, just where it would have been in ancient Greece. Check it out, kind of gaudy. She's breastplated and helmeted. She carries a shield on her left arm and a small 6-foot-high statue of Nike, the goddess of victory, in her right hand. And she is 13 meters or 42 feet high. The ancient Greek travel writer Pausanias saw the original statue, which is long since gone. He describes it. It's ivory and gold. On the middle of her helmet is a sphinx. On either side, griffins. The statue stands upright with a tunic reaching to her feet, and on her breast the head of Medusa is worked in ivory. She holds a statue of victory that is approximately 4 cubits high, and in the other hand a spear. At her feet lies a shield, and near the spear is a serpent. So he gives us the dimensions, and they were used to create this reconstruction. Oddly, it seems likely that the city's name came first, Athens, and that the goddess got her name afterward. Early Mycenaean writings mention Potnia Athena, referring to the, quote, goddess of Athens, as if there were no more to her than that, nothing about the wisdom or the crafts or anything. We have some other guesses about the meaning of her name. Cornutus, that you read, refers to her as Zeus's intelligence and says the name comes from Athena, to perceive, or from Athena, meaning not female, because she isn't a girly girl. Plato gives us a better etymology of Athena, but it's also wrong. Athenoia, the divine mind, or the mind of God. So Athena comes to represent the intelligence and wisdom of Zeus by these sources. You also saw Fulgentius, a very late Roman writer writing in Latin, who tells us about the Vulcan and Minerva story, which is, the Roman names of Hephaestus and Athena. Hephaestus made lightning bolts for Zeus, who said, you can have whatever you want. He asks for Athena. Zeus says, okay, but he also tells Athena to defend herself and her chastity by whatever means necessary. And so she fights Hephaestus off, and he has an oopsie, which Athena wipes off, and when it hits the earth, it impregnates Gaia, the earth. And the child, Erichthonius, is later protected by Athena, becomes one of Athens' first kings. But the idea in Fulgentius is that this is all allegory. Fulgentius wants the story to represent the conflict between passion and will, between fire and wisdom. I'm not sure I'd get it. I like Callimachus's hymn to Athena, although it's definitely longer than it needs to be. But it is cute that it's about the annual bath that they give to her statue. They take it down to the river, wash it, rub it with olive oil, and take it back to the temple. But at least the hymn tells an important story about a character who will keep coming back this term. Tiresias is the blind old prophet who advises Pentheus, and then Oedipus 7 generations later in Thebes. So he lives 7 generations in Thebes. But he saw Athena naked, so he loses his sight. The payback he gets is the power of prophecy, and that turns out to be good for just about everybody, except Pentheus. So you hear Athena arguing with the mother of Tiresias. I will make him a prophet celebrated in the songs of posterity, and one greatly surpassing all the rest. You read Ovid's version of the Arachne story. So Arachne and Minerva, the Roman name of Athena. This was unfortunately not a terribly popular myth among surviving illustrations from ancient Greek art. I only know of this one vase showing 2 people weaving, standing in front of old-timey looms. But Ovid's later Roman telling of the story is awesome, isn't it? And Ovid's version of the story was very popular, so we see many more images of Arachne from the Middle Ages and on than we saw in the ancient world. Of course, middle-aged artists don't seem to know how many legs a spider has, or they just couldn't count to 8. Check out that thing in the middle. My question for you about this story is, who won the contest? Arachne was an idiot to challenge the goddess, obviously, but she's also a victim here. Athena's tapestry celebrates her own accomplishments and includes some warnings about mortals who challenge the gods. What does Arachne's depict? The gods behaving badly, the various rapes of various gods. She showed how human girls are the helpless playthings of the gods. And then notice that Athena cannot find anything wrong with Arachne's work. Did Arachne win? Was it a tie? Either way, Athena beats her in a rage and then eventually pities her and turns her into a spider. As punishment? Is it a punishment? She saves her from suicide by noose and makes her into a creature that spends all of its time weaving. Perhaps this is a reward of sorts. Arachne gets to be the greatest mortal weaver, along with her descendants, forever. Thank you.